October 2009. The air in Eufaula, Oklahoma, still held the lingering warmth of autumn, but a chill had settled over the Jamison family. Bobby, a man of quiet strength, usually unflappable, had grown withdrawn, his eyes often distant. His wife, Sherilyn, once vibrant and grounded, had become increasingly consumed by a fervent, almost desperate spirituality, her conversations peppered with talk of unseen forces and spiritual warfare. Their bright, imaginative 6-year-old Madyson seemed to pick up on their unease, her usual bubbly energy replaced by a quiet watchfulness. Financial struggles had gnawed at them, adding cracks to their seemingly normal life. This road trip, they hoped, was their last chance, a journey towards a new beginning. Their destination, a remote 40-acre property nestled deep within the Sans Bois Mountains. It was a wild, untamed wilderness, notorious for its rugged terrain and local legends whispered in hushed tones. For the Jamisons, it represented a secluded haven, a place to escape the anxieties that had been closing in on them. They piled into their beat-up pickup truck, the last remnants of their former lives packed around them. Days later, the truck was found, abandoned, not on a main road, but on a desolate, rarely traveled dirt track, swallowed by the dense pines of the Sans Bois. It sat there, a silent sentinel of a vanished family. Inside, the scene was eerily undisturbed. Bobby's wallet, containing his driver's license and credit cards, lay on the dashboard. Sherilyn's purse was on the passenger seat, her cell phone beside it. And chillingly, a neat stack of $32,000 in cash sat untouched in a bag, as if simply left behind. The family dog, Roxy, was still there too, alive but whimpering, her ribs showing through her matted fur, starved, but inexplicably still inside the cab. A minor detail, yet it spoke volumes. No struggle, no forced entry. This wasn't a robbery. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery was a child's drawing, taped haphazardly to the dashboard. It was a crude stick figure drawing, depicting 3 figures, clearly a family, being pulled towards a swirling black void. One of the larger stick figures, presumably Bobby or Sherilyn, had small pointed horns on its head. Then came the surveillance footage, a grainy, low-quality feed from a security camera at a nearby property, covering a gas station. It captured the family's last known moments before they plunged into the wilderness. Bobby, uncharacteristically fidgety, moved in and out of the truck, placing and removing items with an almost frantic energy. Sherilyn was even more disturbing. She was seen talking animatedly, sometimes yelling, seemingly into the empty air beside the truck, as if engaged in a furious argument with an invisible entity. Her movements were jerky, erratic. Madyson, nestled between them, simply watched, her big, unnerving eyes fixed on her parents' strange behavior. The footage, played on loop, was a chilling testament to a family on the brink of something incomprehensible. Days stretched into weeks, then months. The vast, unforgiving Sans Bois Mountains swallowed every trace of the Jamisons. Initial search efforts, extensive as they were, yielded nothing but empty promises. Calls to their cell phones went straight to voicemail, the rings echoing into an unreachable void. The complete lack of struggle or forced entry at the abandoned truck, combined with the untouched money, immediately pointed away from the obvious explanations of robbery or abduction. The wilderness, it seemed, had decided to keep its secrets, leaving behind only the perplexing clues of a family that had driven straight into the heart of an unsolvable mystery. The disappearance of the Jamison family sent a shudder through the tight-knit community of Eufaula. News traveled fast in a town that size, and soon Bobby, Sherilyn, and little Madyson were all anyone could talk about. Friends and family, bewildered by the vanishing act, offered a tangled web of conflicting accounts. Some spoke of Sherilyn's recent deep depressions and the marital strife that had festered beneath their quiet exterior. Others claimed they'd witnessed a profound spiritual awakening in Sherilyn, a renewed religious fervor that filled her with an almost manic energy, and overheard her speaking of a secluded, almost monastic life they planned to embrace in the wilderness. Investigators, desperate for answers, soon uncovered Sherilyn's personal journal. It was a disturbing chronicle, filled with rambling entries about demons, spiritual attacks, and an evil entity that she believed was haunting their home. She wrote in frantic bursts about ritualistic cleansing, ancient curses, and the chilling conviction that unseen forces were actively manipulating their lives, pushing them towards an unknown fate. Buried deep within the chaotic scrawl was a particularly unnerving entry, dated just weeks before their disappearance. It described strange, scraping noises coming from their attic at night, and a terrifying encounter with a shadow man, standing silently outside their daughter's window, watching. Bobby, too, had been acting strangely. Multiple witnesses reported his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to their vanishing act. He was unusually withdrawn, his eyes darting nervously, and he muttered darkly about escaping and them following him. A local convenience store clerk recalled Bobby buying an unusually large quantity of camping gear, enough for weeks in the wilderness. But what stuck with the clerk was Bobby's whispered comment, "Gotta be ready, they're getting closer." As the mystery deepened, local whispers began to emerge, connecting the Jamisons to alleged satanic cult activity in the remote Oklahoma wilderness. Law enforcement initially dismissed these as baseless rumors, the product of a small town's fear and imagination. However, a few older residents, those who had lived in the shadow of the Sans Bois for decades, recalled specific, isolated incidents. Stories of strange, masked gatherings deep in the forest, of unusual bonfires and unsettling rituals reported in the mountains as far back as the 70s. These unconfirmed tales, dismissed long ago, now cast a chilling undercurrent over the investigation, a haunting possibility that something far older and darker stirred in those ancient woods. In their desperation, some of the Jamison family members even sought out an elderly, reclusive local shaman. Known for his deep knowledge of the Sans Bois Mountains and their more unsettling legends, he lived a solitary life, rarely interacting with outsiders. He spoke in hushed tones of the spirits of the land and warned that a particular ancient, sacred site deep within the Sans Bois, if disturbed, could lead to dire consequences. "Those who disturb the old ways," he intoned, his eyes cloudy with age but sharp with conviction, "are never seen again." His words were, of course, dismissed by police as mere superstition. But for the distraught family, and perhaps for Sarah Jenkins, the journalist, they added another layer of unsettling folklore to a case already brimming with the bizarre. The mountains, it seemed, had a voice, and it whispered of shadows and ancient secrets. A decade passed, 10 years of silence, punctuated only by the relentless creep of the Oklahoma wilderness, reclaiming what little human imprint had been made. The Jamison case, once a frantic headline, had faded into a cold file, a persistent, haunting enigma whispered about in hushed tones around local campfires. The faded photo on the milk cartons and the community bulletin boards slowly peeled away, a monument to unanswered questions. Then, in November 2013, a grim discovery shattered the quiet. A group of deer hunters, deep in a rarely traversed section of the Sans Bois Mountains, stumbled upon something horrific. Partially buried beneath a thick blanket of fallen leaves, almost perfectly camouflaged by the decay of the forest, were 3 skeletal remains. They were roughly 3 miles from where the Jamisons' truck had been found, chillingly close to the ancient, overgrown, sacred site the shaman had mentioned. Forensic teams converged on the remote scene, their sterile white suits a stark contrast to the untamed, earthy tones of the forest. After meticulous examination, they confirmed the grim truth. The remains belonged to Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madyson Jamison. A wave of both relief and profound sorrow washed over the community. At last, an end to the agonizing uncertainty. But the relief was short-lived, quickly replaced by a new, more horrifying set of questions. The cause of death was impossible to determine. There were no obvious signs of foul play, no bullet wounds, no stab marks, no blunt force trauma, no broken bones that could explain their demise. The bodies, though skeletal, were largely intact, yet the decomposition was peculiar, almost accelerated in some areas, unusually preserved in others, as if exposed to bizarre, fluctuating environmental conditions. The only truly baffling physical evidence found with the remains was a single, tiny, perfectly preserved owl feather, jet black and impossibly soft, clutched tightly in Madyson's skeletal hand. It seemed too deliberate, too perfect to be random. Despite the discovery of the bodies, the most perplexing elements of the initial scene at the truck remained unsolved. The $32,000 in cash, the family's cell phones, and their wallets were still missing from the truck's immediate vicinity. This defied all logic. If the family had simply walked away from the truck, why leave the money behind? If they had been killed there, why would a killer take the money, but then drag the bodies miles away, only to bury them shallowly? The discrepancy deepened the mystery, suggesting a motive and method far more complex than simple crime. As the investigation struggled to find a foothold, a crucial new detail emerged, almost by accident. A distant family member, hesitant and clearly uncomfortable, mentioned that Bobby had recently acquired a strange, old leather-bound magic book. It was a grimoire of sorts, she whispered, filled with obscure symbols, diagrams, and handwritten notes on protection spells and banishing rituals. The book, she believed, had been given to him by an ex-con acquaintance, a man with a murky past and a known fascination with strange, cult-like beliefs. When questioned, the ex-con vehemently denied ever owning or even seeing such a book. But the seed of a terrifying new theory had been planted. Had the Jamisons, in their desperation, sought answers not in the ordinary, but in the realm of the truly bizarre, awakening something ancient and unspeakable in the silent, watchful woods of the Sans Bois Mountains? Detective Miller, a veteran of countless grim cases, couldn't shake the unease the Jamison file instilled. The official reports were tidy, but the loose ends snagged at his mind like burrs. He'd read Sherilyn's journal countless times, dismissing the demons and shadow men as the ravings of a troubled mind. Yet the new details, particularly the owl feather and the magic book, nudged him towards the more bizarre theories. His first stop was the elderly shaman, a man initially dismissed as a crackpot. The shaman, now even more frail but with eyes that held an unnerving clarity, spoke not of demons, but of old ones, ancient entities dwelling in the Sans Bois, disturbed by human intrusion. He described a specific ritual site, a cluster of ancient, moss-covered stones deep in the woods, where offerings were sometimes left to appease these entities. He hinted that the green glow reported by some locals wasn't a trick of light, but a sign of their awakening. Skeptical but thorough, Miller cross-referenced old missing persons reports with the shaman's vague locations. What he found sent a chill down his spine. A pattern of historical disappearances in the Sans Bois, stretching back decades, most dismissed as hiking accidents or runaways. But many had strangely similar circumstances. Untouched belongings left behind, no distress calls, and bodies found years later with indeterminate causes of death. He also found forgotten local records, detailing reports of a disorienting, pervasive silence in certain parts of the mountains, a silence that swallowed sound, leaving hikers feeling utterly alone and disoriented. The magic book, the Grimoire, finally turned up. Bobby's brother, clearly terrified, admitted Bobby had given it to him for safekeeping just days before their last trip. The book was a chilling read. It contained detailed instructions for a ritual involving a pure offering to open the pathways. Miller's blood ran cold when he saw Bobby's frantic handwriting in the margins, desperate annotations, including specific dates and coordinates pointing directly towards the area where the Jamisons' bodies were found. It suggested a terrifying purpose for their final journey. Then, a new witness emerged, one that had been overlooked in the initial chaos. A grizzled old hunter who spent every fall in the Sans Bois, reluctantly recounted an encounter he'd had just days before the Jamisons vanished. He described seeing a tall, gaunt figure in a dark, hooded cloak deep in the thickest part of the woods. The figure had appeared to be observing him silently from a distance, its presence radiating an unearthly stillness, before simply melting back into the trees without a sound. The hunter, a man of few words, spoke of a feeling of profound dread that had settled over him, something far more primal than simple fear. Back in his office, late one night, the Jamison surveillance footage played on a loop. Miller watched Sherilyn again, her frantic gestures, her shouting into the empty air. He'd always attributed it to mental instability. But now, with the new context, he noticed something he'd missed, something subtle, almost imperceptible. For a split second, a barely perceptible distortion in the air directly behind Sherilyn, like heat rising off pavement, but more intense, shimmering, almost as if an invisible entity was present, subtly manipulating her, pulling at her strings. He felt a cold dread wash over him, a creeping realization that some truths, some horrors were beyond human comprehension, lurking unseen in the quiet, whispering woods. Detective Miller stood in the clearing, the weight of the Sans Bois pressing down on him. The coordinates from Bobby's grimoire had led him here, to a patch of forest oddly devoid of undergrowth, centered by a cluster of ancient, moss-covered stones. This was it, the shaman's sacred site. The air here felt thick, unnaturally still, unusual forest sounds strangely muted, as if swallowed by the very ground beneath his feet. He found remnants of a small, recent fire, and a few scattered bizarre trinkets, rusted metal, strangely carved wood, and bits of what looked like dried herbs. Nothing that would immediately scream crime scene, but everything that whispered ritual. He pulled out the picture of Madyson, her small, innocent face smiling from the faded photograph. Then he looked at the jet-black owl feather, still preserved in the evidence bag, found clutched in her skeletal hand. He'd researched its meaning, and what he'd found twisted his gut. In certain ancient Native American beliefs, black owls weren't just birds, they were omens, guides to the spirit world, and sometimes associated with entities that could take things from the physical realm. The feather wasn't a random happenstance. It was a dark, deliberate token, part of a ritual. The pieces, once disparate and chaotic, clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. He deduced the horrifying truth. Bobby, driven to the brink by Sherilyn's increasingly fervent paranoia and his own escalating fear, had resorted to the magic book. The $32,000 cash found in the truck wasn't for a land purchase. It was for an offering. A desperate final attempt to appease or escape the unseen entities he believed were persecuting his family. The unsettling behavior captured on the surveillance footage wasn't just mental distress. It was the Jamison family, in their final moments, caught in the initial frantic stages of a ritual, preparing for an unspeakable sacrifice. The pure offering mentioned in the grimoire, the detective realized with a sickening lurch, referred not to money, but to the most innocent, Madyson. He thought back to the perfectly circular depression on the seabed from the Flight 19 case, a point of contact, a gateway. The Jamison family wasn't murdered in a conventional sense. They had performed a ritual, willingly or unwillingly, that led them to a thin spot in the Sans Bois. The lack of a determined cause of death wasn't due to decomposition. It was because they weren't killed by a human. They were taken. Miller returned, his findings met with a polite but firm skepticism. His superiors, comfortable with the ambiguity of undetermined, quietly closed the case. The idea of interdimensional portals, ancient entities, and human sacrifice was too outlandish, too horrifying, for any official report. The Jamison case remains officially unsolved, labeled as undetermined, a testament to the inexplicable. The Sans Bois Mountains continue to hold their secrets, occasionally whispering tales of disembodied voices carried on the wind and strange fleeting lights seen deep among the pines. The abandoned pickup truck, slowly rusting, and the untouched $32,000 cash, a stark, chilling monument, stand as a testament to a family that walked into the unknown, chasing ghosts, and ultimately becoming ghosts themselves. They were victims of a terrifying, inexplicable phenomenon that still lingers in the dark heart of the mountains, forever waiting for its next offering. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the ancient trees, you might swear you can still hear the soft, mournful hoot of a black owl watching.